The smell of freshly baked bread filled the Whitmore mansion that morning. Warm, soft, alive. It was the first time in years that something human had touched those marble walls. Flour floated in the sunlight like confetti. Clara laughed as two small pairs of hands pressed and folded the dough beside hers. Identical twin boys, blind since the accident. Their faces glowing with joy they could feel but not see. "Gentle," she said, guiding their fingers. "Let the dough breathe." Ethan giggled. "It feels funny." Evan added, "It feels alive." "Yes," Clara smiled. "That's because it is." For a moment, there was nothing but laughter, real laughter, the kind that makes even walls want to listen. But then came the footsteps, heavy, sharp, certain. The laughter died before he even entered. Mr. Whitmore's voice filled the room like thunder. "What is going on here?" The twins froze. Clara turned, startled but standing tall. "We're baking, sir. The boys wanted—" "I told you before," he snapped. "They don't need games or fantasies. They need discipline." The warmth drained from the air. The boys' small shoulders stiffened. Clara swallowed hard. "Sir, they're not playing. They're learning. This helps them." "I hire therapists for that," he interrupted, his tone cold, sharp, deliberate. "Not maids with wild ideas." "Father," Ethan whispered. His voice trembled like a candle in the wind. But Mr. Whitmore didn't look at him. "Enough. Go to your room." Evan hesitated. "But we made it together, Bisha." "I said enough." The twins shrank back, one clutching the other's hand. And then Clara, still trembling, still soft, said the one thing that would change everything. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Sir, all I see are two little boys learning how to feel the world again." The room went dead silent. Even the oven hummed quieter. For a second, his eyes met hers. A flash of something human, something buried. Then it was gone. "Pack your things," he said, turning away. "You're finished here." He walked out, leaving the smell of burnt pride behind him. That was the day the bread fell silent, but it was also the day everything began. Because even after she was fired, the warmth she brought didn't leave with her. The twins remembered the sound of her laughter, the rhythm of her voice, the way she turned silence into song and loneliness into light. They remembered the touch of her hands guiding theirs, the courage in her words, the way she saw beauty even in their blindness. For the first time, they had felt seen, and that memory and that love would bring her back. Clara wasn't a teacher. She wasn't even supposed to matter. But somehow in that cold house built on grief and silence, she became the one thing money couldn't buy: hope. Through courage and compassion, a poor nanny taught two blind billionaire boys to see the world again. Not with their eyes, but with their hearts. And in doing so, she opened their fathers too. Because sometimes the people with the least to give end up giving the most. And sometimes the ones who walk into your home quietly leave it forever changed. If love was something you couldn't see, would you still recognize it when it touched you? Tell me in the comments, do you believe kindness can open the eyes that grief has closed? Welcome back to Cardinal Stories, where ordinary people teach us extraordinary lessons about love, courage, and second chances. Clara stood in the doorway of the Whitmore estate, her cheap suitcase dwarfed by the carved mahogany door. The rain had soaked the hem of her gray skirt, and her hand, pale, calloused, steady, clutched the handle like it was her last proof of belonging anywhere. The man who opened the door didn't smile. Mr. Whitmore's suit was pressed like armor. Even his grief seemed tailored. "You're the new nanny," he said flatly. Not a question, a fact weighed down with warning. "Yes, sir," Clara replied softly. Her voice carried warmth that didn't belong in a place so cold. As she followed him through the hall, the house revealed itself like a secret that didn't want to be told. Chandeliers dripped crystal light onto floors so polished they reflected the rain. The air smelled faintly of lemon polish and loneliness. "The boys don't speak to strangers," Mr. Whitmore said as they climbed the stairs. "They prefer silence." Clara nodded, but her heart sank. In her 5 years of caring for children, she'd learned that silence was rarely preference. It was defense. He stopped outside a door with two brass nameplates: Ethan and Evan. The names gleamed but felt untouched, as if no one had said them out loud in years. He knocked once, opened the door, and stepped aside. Inside, the room was dimly lit by afternoon light filtered through gauzy curtains. Two boys sat on the floor beside a toppled chessboard. One's hands were fisted, the others were trembling. "Boys," Mr. Whitmore said, "this is Miss Clara. She'll be with you now." Neither child turned. Their eyes, pale gray and unfocused, didn't seek her, but Clara felt them searching anyway, in a way that was deeper than sight. Evan's jaw tightened, Ethan's lips parted, then pressed together again as if holding 1,000 unsaid words. Mr. Whitmore cleared his throat. "Dinner is at 7. Do what you can." And he left. When the door clicked shut, the silence stretched. Awkward, thick, almost alive. Clara knelt beside the spilled chess pieces. "You both play?" she asked gently. No answer. She touched a pawn, set it upright. "When I was little, my brother cheated at every game. Said winning was more fun than playing." I disagreed. A pause, then a faint sound. Not a word, but a small scoff. Clara smiled. "Good. A sound." She placed one pawn into each of their hands. "You can't see the board," she said, "but maybe you can feel the story." Evan frowned. "It's just pieces." "Maybe," Clara said softly, "but every piece still knows where it belongs, if you listen long enough." The words hung in the air like dust, caught in light. That evening, after the boys retreated to their quiet dinner, Clara stood in the kitchen doorway, watching maids move like ghosts through stainless steel in silence. Everything gleamed, but nothing felt alive. She looked at the empty counter, at the cold oven, and whispered to herself, "Maybe tomorrow I'll bake something warm." Because warmth was all she had left to give. By morning, the mansion's silence felt like fog, thick, unmoving, eternal. Clara woke before sunrise, pulled her hair into a neat bun, and walked barefoot to the kitchen. The floor was cold under her feet, the air still heavy with last night's rain. She reached for flour, sugar, and eggs, not because anyone had asked for them, but because something in her longed to fill the emptiness with life. When she cracked the first egg, the sound echoed. It was absurd how loud hope could be when it had nowhere else to go. She kneaded the dough slowly, whispering to herself, "You can't heal what you don't touch." By the time sunlight spilled across the marble counters, the oven's warmth had transformed the air. Rich, golden, alive. The smell of rising bread curled up the staircase like an invitation. Upstairs, Ethan turned his head first. "What's that smell?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. Evan frowned. "I don't know. Something's burning?" "No," Ethan said, standing. "It smells like home." They followed the scent, cautious, one hand brushing the wall, the other clasped together. Their footsteps were hesitant but sure, as if the aroma itself was leading them. When they reached the kitchen doorway, Clara turned, surprised. "Well," she said, wiping flour from her cheek, "looks like the smell found you." The twins stood side by side, barefoot in their matching pajamas, faces tilted toward the warmth like flowers to sunlight. Ethan sniffed. "What are you making?" "Bread," she said, "the kind that talks back when you touch it." Evan tilted his head. "Bread doesn't talk." "Oh, it does," Clara said. "You just have to listen with your hands." She placed a lump of dough before them. "Here, feel it breathe." The boys hesitated. Then slowly their small hands reached out, uncertain then curious. Their fingers pressed into the soft dough, leaving imprints. "It's warm," Ethan said. "Alive," Evan added. Clara smiled. "Exactly." For the first time, the kitchen wasn't silent. It was filled with soft laughter and the rhythmic thump of dough meeting the counter. Clara guided their hands. Fold, press, turn. The flour dusted their hair like snow. When Evan accidentally dropped a handful on her sleeve, Ethan laughed. A bright, startled sound that broke something open in the air. Clara froze, eyes wide, heart swelling. It had been years since laughter had lived in this house. "Was that me?" Ethan whispered, half embarrassed. "Yes," Clara said softly, "and it's the most beautiful thing I've heard all week." She reached for the oven mitts. "All right, bakers, time to meet the fire." Together they slid the loaf inside. The twins stood close, listening to the quiet hiss of heat. Clara said, You know, my mother used to say bread remembers the hands that made it. Evan tilted his head. How can it remember? Because when someone makes it with kindness, you can taste it. The boys were silent, but something had shifted, like a window had opened somewhere deep inside them. Minutes later, when the bread came out, golden and fragrant, Clara broke a small piece, cooled it in her palm, and placed it into each of their hands. Now, she whispered, taste what you made. Ethan chewed slowly, then sneezed faintly. Evan swallowed, voice trembling. It tastes warm. Clara's throat tightened. That's what love tastes like, she said. Outside, the rain had stopped. The light through the window fell across their faces, soft and forgiving. For the next few days, the Whitmore mansion smelled like cinnamon and new beginnings. Each morning, Clara and the twins met in the kitchen, rolling dough, laughing softly, learning to shape trust as gently as bread. But by Thursday, the spell began to crack. It started with footsteps, heavy, deliberate, echoing down the marble corridor. Mr. Whitmore's shadow filled the doorway before he did. His voice cut through the hum of warmth. What is going on here? Clara straightened, wiping flour from her hands. We're baking, sir. The boys, he interrupted, don't need to play house in my kitchen. Ethan's hand froze mid-motion. Evan instinctively reached for him. Clara's chest tightened. It's not play, Mr. Whitmore. It's therapy of a kind, tactile learning. It helps them. I pay professionals for therapy, he said sharply. You were hired to supervise, not experiment. The word experiment stung. She forced a breath. Sir, they've begun to open up. You should have heard them laughing. I didn't hire you for laughter, he snapped. I hired you for silence. The boys flinched as if struck. The oven hummed quietly in protest. Clara wanted to argue, wanted to tell him that silence wasn't peace, it was grief. But his eyes, cold and exhausted, told her he was drowning too deep to hear her. He turned to the twins. Back to your room, now. Evan's voice cracked. But we made the bread. You heard me. They rose, small shoulders stiff, and left hand in hand, leaving behind 2 perfect loaves cooling on the counter. The door closed. The warmth died. Clara stood there long after they were gone. The smell of baked bread, sweet, gentle, felt cruel now. She could still hear the boys' laughter echoing faintly in her memory, now replaced by footsteps fading upstairs. She picked up one of the loaves and broke it open. Steam escaped. Warm, soft, forgiving. Her tears fell silently into it. That evening, the mansion returned to its usual rhythm of quiet meals in separate rooms. From the corridor outside the twins' door, Clara heard a faint voice whispering. I told you he'd end it, Evan murmured. Ethan answered, he doesn't like happy sounds. Then we shouldn't laugh anymore. No, Ethan said, we should laugh when he's not listening. The words cut her deeper than any reprimand. Later that night, she stood in her small servants' quarters, staring at her packed suitcase. The urge to run, to escape the coldness that no oven could warm, clawed at her. But then she remembered Ethan's small fingers pressing into dough, Evan's hesitant smile, the way they had said the bread tasted like love. She sat on the bed, closed her eyes, and whispered to herself, you don't quit on broken things, Clara, you mend them. Outside, thunder rolled across the night sky, a low growl that promised another storm. In her heart, she made a decision. She wouldn't leave, not yet, not while there was still breath in the warmth she'd kindled. The next morning, she found the boys sitting silently by the window, their faces turned toward the sound of rain. A chessboard rested between them again, the pieces arranged perfectly, untouched. Clara knelt beside them. Do you want to play? Ethan shook his head. He said it's useless. Maybe, she said gently, but maybe useless things are the ones that keep us human. No answer, just silence. Still, she began to move the pieces, slowly, patiently, her fingers tracing the board like a prayer. Evan finally reached out, found a pawn, and moved it forward. Clara smiled faintly. A small defiance is still a beginning. The storm arrived just after dusk, sudden, violent, unapologetic. Lightning split the sky above the Whitmore estate, followed by thunder that rattled its ancient bones. Wind howled through the marble halls, tearing through the calm like a warning. By the time the power went out, the mansion was swallowed by darkness. Clara lit a single candle, its flame trembling, as if it too feared the storm. The silence that followed was unnerving. No hum of electricity. No faint classical music from the upper floors. Just the rain, hammering the windows like desperate fingers. She made her way toward the twins' room, her candle casting thin light against the walls. "Ethan? Evan?" she called softly. A faint voice answered, trembling on. "We're here." She pushed open the door. The boys sat huddled together near the bed, their faces pale and turned toward the sound of her footsteps. "Are you all right?" she asked. Evan's voice quivered. "We heard something break." "It's just the wind," Clara said, crouching beside them. "The house is loud when it's lonely." The lights flickered once, then died again. The storm howled louder. Ethan flinched. "It sounds like the world's ending." Clara smiled softly. "Maybe it's just being washed clean." She hesitated, then reached for their hands. "Come on, let's go where it's warm." They followed her down the dark hallway, fingers tracing the walls, guided by her voice and the flicker of the candle. In the kitchen, she set the candle on the counter. The flame danced across their faces, two mirrors of fear and curiosity. "Sit," she said gently. "We'll make the storm a friend." Evan frowned. "How do you do that?" Clara began gathering ingredients by touch. "By keeping our hands busy until the thunder forgets our names and flour, sugar, milk." She moved as if she'd done this all her life, not for the bread, but for the stillness it gave her heart. When the thunder cracked again, both boys jumped. Without thinking, Clara reached out, pulling them closer. "Shh," she whispered. "Do you hear it?" "Hear what?" Ethan asked. "The rhythm. Listen." The storm rumbled again, steady, pulsing. "It's like a heartbeat," Clara said. "The world reminding us it's alive." Something in her tone softened the air. The boys leaned closer, their fear melting into curiosity. "All right, bakers," she said. "Tonight, no oven, just sound." She placed their hands on the mixing bowl. "Flour sounds like snow when it falls," she whispered, letting it sift through her fingers. They smiled. "And sugar? It's the whisper before sweetness." Evan giggled. Ethan repeated, "The whisper before sweetness." They mixed the ingredients by hand, the sound of stirring blending with the rumble of the storm. Their laughter began to fill the cracks in the night. Then a sudden gust slammed a window open. The candle flickered, almost dying. The twins gasped. Clara moved fast, shutting the latch, steadying the light with her hand. In the wavering glow, she looked at them on their identical faces, wide-eyed and trusting, and said, "You see, even the dark listens when we're brave." Ethan whispered, "You make it sound easy." "It's not," she said honestly, "but courage doesn't mean not being afraid. It means baking anyway." The boys laughed, and for the first time, the sound of thunder didn't frighten them. It joined them. When the storm began to fade, the kitchen felt warmer, the air thick with unspoken safety. The candle burned lower, its flame small but steady. Clara leaned against the counter, exhausted but peaceful. Evan yawned. "Will you stay until the storm stops?" She smiled. "I'll stay until morning." They curled up beside her on the rug, heads resting against her skirt. Outside, the rain softened to a whisper. For the first time, the mansion wasn't lonely. It was alive, full of breath, heartbeats, and the soft sigh of three souls no longer afraid of the dark. By morning, the storm had passed, but its memory lingered. The mansion smelled faintly of damp air and cinnamon, traces of the night before. Clara woke in the kitchen chair, the twins still asleep beside her, curled like two halves of one heartbeat. For a moment, she didn't move. She just watched them breathe, soft, even, unguarded. It was the first time she'd seen them at peace. When she finally stood, the boys stirred. "Morning," she whispered. Ethan blinked toward her voice. "Is it still raining?" "No," Clara said. "The world's washed clean." They smiled faintly, still drowsy. Later that day, after Mr. Whitmore left for a business meeting, the twins found Clara again in the kitchen. She was at the counter, turning over a small locket in her hands. "What's that?" Evan asked. Clara froze. Just something old, this. Ethan tilted his head. Can we feel it? She hesitated, then nodded, placing the locket in their open palms. It's round, Evan said, tracing it with his fingertips. There's a picture inside? Yes, Clara whispered. A little girl. Your daughter? Ethan asked softly. Clara's throat tightened. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she nodded. Yes, her name was Lily. Evan turned the locket over gently. Was? She passed away, Clara said. The words trembled out of her like air escaping a wound. 2 years ago, a fever that came too fast. One day she was laughing in my arms, the next, her voice broke. The twins didn't move, but the air around them shifted the way it does when grief recognizes itself. Ethan reached out first, finding her wrist. You miss her, he said simply. Clara smiled through tears. Every day, but when I bake, I feel her here. She used to say the dough was alive, that it laughed when it rose. Evan whispered, That's what you were doing with us. Clara nodded. I guess I was trying to remember how to make something live again. The kitchen fell into a silence that wasn't empty. It was reverent. The kind of silence that holds truth. Ethan's fingers tightened around the locket. We used to laugh too, he said. His voice wavered. Clara met his sightless eyes. Used to? Evan's hand found his brother's shoulder. Before the crash. Clara's breath caught. Crash? They nodded. Our mom used to bake, Evan said softly. Every Sunday, we'd sit on the counter and help her stir. She said baking was love you could taste. Ethan swallowed hard. We were in the car with her when the truck hit us. She died. We didn't. The words hung heavy in the air, simple, devastating. Clara knelt between them. You lost her. And your sight. Evan nodded. Everything went dark. And Father, did he stop talking about her? He stopped everything. Ethan's voice broke. He says remembering hurts too much. Tears blurred Clara's vision. Oh, sweethearts, she whispered. Forgetting hurts even more. The twins leaned against her, both trembling. For a long time they said nothing, and neither did she. There were no right words, only warmth, only shared pain, made smaller by closeness. As the afternoon light shifted through the kitchen window, Clara spoke again, her tone gentle. Do you know what I think? Evan sniffled. What? I think your mother's hands are still in yours. Every time you touch the dough, every time you feel its rise, that's her love remembering you. The twins were silent, their faces tilted toward her like sunflowers following light they could not see. Then Ethan whispered, Can we bake today? For her? Clara smiled through her tears. Yes, let's make her favorite. They worked quietly, reverently, the way people pray when they don't have words. The smell of vanilla filled the air. Evan laughed once, a fragile golden sound, and Clara's heart caught on it like a note that refused to fade. For the first time since she'd entered the Whitmore mansion, Clara woke to the sound of laughter. It wasn't loud or careless. It was soft and calm, the kind that sounds like a secret between hearts. She followed it downstairs and stopped in the doorway. Evan and Ethan sat at the counter waiting. Their hands were already dusted with flour. Ethan turned toward her voice. We thought we'd start without you. Clara smiled. Mutiny in my own kitchen? Evan grinned. We wanted to surprise you. On the counter sat 2 misshapen balls of dough, uneven and lumpy, but alive. Clara gasped softly. You remembered the steps. We remembered you, Ethan said simply. Her eyes glistened. Then that's even better. They baked in rhythm, laughter spilling through the mansion like sunlight breaking through clouds. Evan drummed on the counter with wooden spoons. Ethan made up ridiculous rhymes about flour and love. Clara joined in, her laughter lighter than it had been in years. When the loaves finally came out golden, they gathered at the table with warm butter and a pitcher of milk. The boys reached for their plates, their movements careful but confident now, no longer hesitant. You know, Clara said, you two have become excellent bakers. Ethan grinned. Then we'll start a bakery. Call it the Blind Batch. Clara laughed, startled. That's terrible. That's genius, Evan corrected, smirking. Everyone will want bread made by the boys who can't even see it rise. They all burst out laughing. And for a moment, it didn't matter who was rich or poor, who had lost sight or hope. The air was full of life again. After lunch, Ethan asked something he never had before. "Clara, can we go outside?" She hesitated. "The garden?" He nodded. "We want to feel the sun again." So she led them, one hand on her arm, one on his brother's shoulder, down the marble steps and into the wide, wild garden. The air smelled of earth and rain. The boys lifted their faces toward the warmth. Evan crouched, running his fingers through the damp grass. Ethan reached for a rose bush, tracing a petal's softness. Clara watched them quietly, her heart aching in the best way, because joy always came dressed as something fragile. "It's beautiful," Ethan whispered. Clara smiled. "You can tell?" He nodded. "You can hear beauty. You just have to listen for the quiet parts." Evan added, "Like dough rising." "Like love returning," Clara said. They stood there, surrounded by light and wind and everything that once seemed unreachable. That evening, as the twins napped on the couch after their first garden walk, Clara noticed something new on the piano in the corner. A layer of dust brushed aside, and a sheet of music placed neatly on the stand. When she touched the keys, a soft chord filled the room. The sound drifted upstairs, and she heard small footsteps. Evan appeared first. "You play?" "Not well," she admitted, "but maybe we can learn together." Ethan joined him. "We can't read notes." "You don't need to," Clara said, smiling. "Music's just emotion you can touch with your ears." She guided their hands to the keys, one on each side. Together, they pressed, hesitant at first, then bolder, until the sound became something whole. The melody was crooked, simple, but alive. For the first time, the mansion didn't echo. It sang. Mr. Whitmore paused in the hallway, unseen, listening. He hadn't heard that sound, laughter, music, warmth, since before the accident. For a fleeting moment, his expression cracked. Then he turned away, retreating into the only silence he knew how to survive. The peace didn't last. It never does. 3 days later, the kitchen was alive again. Flower clouds, giggles, the hum of happiness that had become their ritual. The twins were baking raisin bread when the sound of heavy footsteps froze everything. "Mr. Whitmore!" His voice thundered before he appeared. "What is going on in here?" Clara turned, startled. "We were just—" "I told you before, Miss Clara," he said coldly. "This is not a playground." Evan flinched. Ethan whispered, "Father, we—" But their father's gaze was already fixed on Clara. Something hard and unfamiliar burned in his eyes. He held out a sheet of paper. "Do you recognize this?" Clara's stomach dropped. It was a letter, her unpaid debt notice, the one she'd hidden in her suitcase. "I found this when your room was cleaned," he said. "Tell me, Miss Clara, did you plan to pay your bills with sympathy? Or were my sons your ticket out of poverty?" Clara went pale. "Sir, Save it," he cut her off. "I will not have manipulation disguised as compassion. You're dismissed immediately." Ethan's voice broke. "No, she didn't." "Enough," the father roared. The twins reached for Clara, but she stepped back, shaking. Her hands trembled, her voice soft but steady. "Mr. Whitmore, all I ever wanted was to give them back their laughter." He looked away. "They don't need your pity." She swallowed hard, nodded once, and whispered, "No, they needed love. But I suppose that scares you more than losing them ever did." The silence after those words was unbearable. Clara turned, gathered her coat, and walked out into the cold rain. Behind her, she heard Ethan crying, real, uncontrollable sobs. Evan whispered through the door, "She was light, Father. She made us see." But the door shut anyway. That night, the mansion returned to silence. Thick, suffocating. The twins refused to eat. Mr. Whitmore sat alone in his study, staring at the last loaf of bread she'd baked. When he broke it open, steam rose, soft, fragrant, forgiving. And for the first time in years, he wept. Days passed. The mansion dimmed again, as if it had exhaled all its light when Clara left. The twins tried to bake on their own. They measured by touch, whispered the steps she'd taught them. But the dough came out heavy, uneven. The bread collapsed in the oven. Evan sighed. "We did everything she said." Ethan whispered, "Except believe." They tried again. this time slower, gentler, remembering her voice. You can't heal what you don't touch. The third loaf rose perfectly. They brushed it with butter, wrapped it in a towel, and told the driver to deliver it to Clara's small apartment across town. When Clara opened the door that evening, the smell hit her first. Warm bread, exactly like the ones they'd made together. Her hands shook as she unfolded the towel. A small note rested on top. For you, from the bakers who learned to see. Tears spilled before she finished reading. She sat at her table, the tiny room lit by the orange glow of sunset, and whispered to the empty air, maybe love does come back if you let it. She didn't know that. At that very moment, Mr. Whitmore stood outside his son's room, listening to them laugh softly as they told stories about Miss Clara. His pride cracked completely. He realized then that he'd mistaken control for protection, and that love, the kind Clara gave freely, had been the only thing keeping them all alive. He made his choice. When Clara heard the knock the next morning, she thought it was the landlord. She opened the door and froze. Mr. Whitmore stood there, not the man of iron she remembered, but a father with hollow eyes and trembling hands. Beside him, the twins clutched a small wicker basket. Evan spoke first. We came to bring you home. Clara blinked. Home? Ethan smiled faintly. Where the warmth lives. Mr. Whitmore stepped forward, voice rough. I was wrong, Miss Clara. I thought keeping my boys safe meant keeping everyone else out. But you taught them to live again. You taught me. Clara's eyes filled. They taught me too. He nodded, tears breaking through. Would you come back? For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she smiled, gentle, trembling. Only if we start the morning with bread. The twins laughed, and just like that, the air shifted. The ache turned to light. The mansion smelled of warmth again. Flour dusted the counters, laughter tangled with music. Mr. Whitmore sat at the table this time, coat off, sleeves rolled, helping the boys knead. Clara moved between them, guiding, laughing, alive. Gentle, she said, let the dough breathe. Ethan nodded, like you taught us. Evan added, like Mom used to say, love you can taste. When the loaves came out golden, they gathered by the window. Morning light streamed through the glass, bathing them all in gold. Clara broke a piece, handed it to each twin, then one to their father. To new beginnings, she whispered. They ate in silence, the kind of silence that doesn't hurt anymore. Outside, the world was bright again. Inside, the mansion finally felt like home. Who seem lost are the ones who help everyone else find their way. If you believe love can be taught, like baking, like courage, drop in the comments. Who in your life helped you see when you couldn't?